talk about this.
Yay, good, 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 good.
Yeah.
Oh.
So, all right, I'm gonna turn my fan off.
All right. Hey, friends, we are here. Thank you for waiting on us. We had just a little bit of technical delay, but we are good now. And I am here with Shannon Popkin, and I've been so excited. I've been so looking forward to this, Shannon. Thank you so much for giving us your time today to talk about your new book, Comparison Girl. We'll dive into that in just a second, but I want to let you all know that I have gotten to know Shannon a little bit through Flourish Writers. That's the writing group that I talk about a lot that I'm a part of. And Shannon has been a mentor to me, unknown to her, probably for a little while, as she has shared her gifts with the Flourish Writers community. So thank you for that, because you are a blessing to all of us that are wanting to get stronger in this skill of writing and using that gift to reach other people. So thank you for sharing with us. And some time ago, a few weeks ago, I guess, Shannon put up a little invitation to be a part of the launch team for this book. And I jumped at the chance to read this and to learn from you. And so thank you very much. And I'm going to tell everybody what I know about you, and then you can fill in and correct me where I'm wrong, right? Shannon lives in Western Michigan, and just I have family in Allendale, so you probably know where that is. So yeah, so I have been in your neck of the woods a lot. I spent a lot of time there when I was a girl, especially. So yeah, I've walked the pier out on South Haven, right, Grand Haven, many times. Yes. So yeah, so she lives in Western Michigan and is wife to Ken and mother of 3, a girl and 2 boys, and she worships and serves at Ada Bible Church, right? That's there in the Grand Rapids area. And that's a multiple campus church, right? Do I have that right? Yeah, big church. Yeah. So she's a speaker, a writer, a blogger. Comparison Girl is her 4th book, right? And no more. Yep.
Well, depending how you count them.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a coloring book, so I don't know if that gets counted in there, right? So
you know what? I count all kinds of things when we put creative content in the world. It's always a journey. So everyone is like birthing something new. So yeah, that's awesome. So and her website is right here. She can be found at shannonpopkin.com and all the things. And so anything else you want us to know about you before we dive into Comparison Girl?
No, but I wondered, where do you live, Angie?
Yes, I'm in Southern Illinois. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember
as far
now.
away from Chicago as you can be and still be in Illinois. Actually, about 6 hours south of Chicago. Yeah.
Oh my
Yep.
goodness.
That's where we are. Yeah. So it's about 900 miles, about 500 miles, I'm sorry, between my house and my Aunt Twyla's house, which is who I went to visit all the time when I was young in Allendale. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So that's where I am. So I have found this book to be a treasure. I mean that. And I'm really grateful for the chance to talk to you more about it. And first, I just want to ask, why do you feel passionate about inviting conversation around comparing ourselves to other people? What's that for you? Why do you feel passionate about that?
Well, I think it's such a burden, isn't it? It's such there's so much bondage related to it. And I just want us to all live in freedom. It's available to us. Like,
yes.
why would we refuse the freedom that Jesus offers us?
Yes. Yeah.
And it's a subtle kind of bondage. Like, we're not usually thinking about bondage when we start comparing with somebody else. We're not thinking about this cosmic battle going on, this struggle between good and evil. We're not thinking about the tempter and the deceiver who's coming after us. We're just comparing. We're just doing what seems natural. But it's just part of the world that we live in, to measure ourselves against each other. And I just want us all to be free from that. That's really why I wrote this book.
Yeah, thank you for that. I thought it was interesting, the chapters. I did not read ahead. I read, so on our launch team, one of the things that I loved so much is on Thursday nights we would gather and kind of have our own Bible study, the launch team would. And so I just read each week, like as I was preparing, just for a Bible study. And it was interesting to me when I first looked through the chapters and the topics that I was expecting to grab me the most. It was some of the ones that I kind of wasn't expecting to grab me the most, where the Lord really did the most work on my heart through the book. So will you tell us just a few of the ways that you unpack how we compare each other in the book? What are some of the chapters?
Yeah, well, and I'd love to hear which ones were most impactful to you. Yeah. So, so the first chapter is just kind of setting up the problem and these 2 mindsets, the world's mindset of measuring up, and then Jesus coming and inviting us to this me-free living. And so just the dichotomy of those 2 is in the first chapter. And then the subsequent chapters are just the different ways that we tend to compare. And so comparing my sin and your sin is chapter 2, and then comparing wealth, and then comparing our external packaging, and then comparing our work for Jesus, our ministries.
Mhm.
And so for the flourish writers, that's definitely, we always struggle so much with
Yes.
our, the ways that we're contributing to Jesus's kingdom. And then comparing status was just
Mhm.
a little bit different.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
those are the 5 different chapters on 5 different ways that we compare. And
Yeah.
then each of them are looking at a conversation, at least one conversation that Jesus had, or a parable that he told. And he's responding to somebody who's comparing in those same categories.
Yeah, it's interesting when you went through those chapters, like the one that I thought would grab me the most is the comparing our ministries, because I have
Okay.
struggled with that. And it
Yeah.
was really interesting as I read it, I could really celebrate how much work the Lord and I have done, where I'm like, I think I
Oh,
do have freedom from a lot of this. And so it was really affirming in some
wow.
ways. But when you just said, I got those, what I call like Holy Spirit bumps, when you just simply said the name of the chapter that said comparing my sin and yours, like that
Mm.
one really grabbed a hold of my heart in a way that I'm like, this is sin in me that actually is still like unobserved in me, you know? So it
Mm.
was really interesting because I was sharing with a different friend of mine. I'm like, it really opened my heart to some areas that I do this, but it also was some places where I could really celebrate growth. And so I liked
Mm.
that. I liked being
Me
able to
too.
experience both things through reading the chapters. Yeah,
Praise the Lord.
absolutely.
Yeah, I think that for those of us who have been around church for a while, we're comfortable with Bible study. We maybe struggle with like we there, it's maybe not, we're not cognizant of it, but our hearts crave, like we feel so badly about our sin, and we carry the shame, and so our hearts naturally gravitate to where we can point at someone else's sin, and
Oh,
we crave that. And it's a very subtle thing,
yes.
but yeah, looking at somebody else's sin and measuring my sin against their sin, Jesus warns us left
Oh my
and right
goodness. And
about doing
for
that.
me personally, I don't mind sharing, like, one of the things that the Lord's really been working on my heart about is separating church from Jesus, because not everything we do
Mhm.
at church has something to do with Jesus. And I've been in church all my
Right.
life, been in church leadership all my life, whatever. And so this has been a process for me over the last couple of years. And in that, I have found that I am easily to embrace those imperfections in people, except for the legalism and the good church mindset, if you will. And
Yeah.
on that, I am very hard. And as I was comparing yours, and yet I lived that way for years, where this is the good church
Mhm.
thing to do, and this that makes me good with Jesus and all that stuff. And so to really feel the Lord opening my heart to saying, actually, though, you are forgetting that I love them with this same intensity that I love you, now that you sort of have this freedom from it, right? And so, and your job is
Absolutely.
not to say, well, the church people push, pshaw, whatever, and these
For
and
sure.
that, right, yeah. And so, but I found myself like, I actually am comparing, I guess, maybe the sin that perhaps I've let go of and traded for a different sin, if even if,
Totally.
yeah, if you can,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
I think I painted a scenario where, you're walking into church and you're looking over at some other person who just does not belong in church. Like it's just obvious, that it's like this other person, and they don't fit, they're not dressed right. Maybe they're dressed, they're just not a churchy type person. Maybe
Mhm.
you even know them, and you know that their morals are flawed or whatever. And so I said, okay, but if you're thinking, I would never, but then you transfer your disgust to the person who would look down on that, well, you're kind of doing the same thing. You're just falling into the trap a
Exactly.
different way,
Exactly.
right?
I mean, so that you say it, because I just see myself, it's something that I've been able to confess and ask for the Lord to really open my heart to how I can do that better through reading
Mhm.
your book, because I've noticed I've just sort of transferred my disgust, exactly what you're saying.
We're
Yeah.
we're disgusted with the disgusted person. I mean, it's like,
Yes.
that's
Yes.
probably not solving the problem.
And I think, would you agree, when we are disgusted with anyone, like, and say, then we're elevating ourselves in that comparison
Yes.
trap, right? And saying, well, I
Yeah.
would never act like that, so at least I'm not that bad,
Mhm. Yep.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, Ed Stetzer talks in his book, Christians in the Age of Outrage. He says that we can't communicate disgust. We
mhm,
can't when we communicate disgust, we're also communicating something about ourselves.
that's
We're
right.
elevating ourselves. We
Yeah,
can't do one without the other. And
right.
so
Yeah.
they're tied. And we've got to look at what we're saying about ourselves when we're communicating disgust toward another person created in God's image.
This is hard. I've shared on the page as I've been talking about being on your launch team and reading this book that I'm like, this has been uncomfortable for me, but
Mm,
but I have found so much when the Lord stirs something uncomfortable to me. It's also very invitational to take a gentle look at yourself and say, how do I then better align my heart with his heart as we move through this process? Right.
right.
Yeah.
You know what? If we're not comfortable, I mean, if we're
I
always
know. Yes.
comfortable
Mhm.
in
Yeah.
Bible study, we're probably not growing. And I
Nope.
was uncomfortable, Angie, leading even our launch team, like
Mhm.
mostly women like you who are in ministry and you're in leadership. And I was like uncomfortable asking the questions of myself and of everyone else. But I think that's
Yeah.
where the growth happens,
I
right?
do too, and over the weeks as we shared together, I really saw some ladies kind of, letting maybe
It
their
was,
guard down a little bit and
oh,
really sharing some stuff about how they either had grown through this process or were growing as they looked at it closer. So, yeah,
I,
I really appreciate your leadership as we did
it,
that. Yeah. Mhm.
well, it was, it's a busy season, so it's nothing about my leadership. 'Cause oftentimes I was scrambling at the last minute to prepare my
Oh,
own
I
Bible,
appreciate you letting Jesus lead through you, right? Right.
literally doing. But man, I got some amazing phone calls this week as women finished up the book and
Good.
were like, one woman was like, I have been in this bondage for
Mhm.
20 years and
Mhm.
I've read books about the topic of the bondage, but I haven't like what I really needed to set me free from this comparison struggle that I have is I needed to hear Jesus talk to me about a me free perspective. Like
Yeah.
it's really not about me. Like
Yeah.
if I can please just get my eyes off of
Yeah.
me,
Mhm.
there's freedom.
Right.
And she's given me permission to share. Like this woman has had food addiction issues
Mhm.
literally for decades, and she said that she recently gained some weight from after a surgery and she went all last summer. She did not wear short sleeves and she avoided being in groups of people and just different habits that she saw in herself. And she's like, I'm wearing short sleeves and
Yeah.
I'm willing to be with, seen by whatever group. I've got too much work to do for the kingdom
Yes.
to be hiding away
Yes.
because of this
And that's the way to
obsession.
say it, right?
So
Because the enemy, if he can keep us, focused on ourselves, then he
totally.
can stifle those gifts that we've been given so that we can glorify the Lord and be a blessing to the people around us. And when
Yeah.
you really think about it in that kind of to me, like that black and white, this is a tactic that he uses to make you less effective. And if you can battle it from that perspective, I think then that's where the freedom and the winning, for lack of a better word, comes from, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if we can think about the fact that God has important work for us to do and
Yes.
we're all part of this
Yes.
kingdom movement,
Right.
and what our work entails is getting our eyes off ourselves and being selfless, like pouring ourselves out the way that Jesus did. Well, so then what is our enemy going to tempt us? He's going to ask us to do exactly the opposite, to get
Yes.
our eyes back on ourselves and get
Yes.
our eyes off of what the Lord has for us and all of the good works prepared in advance for us to do, to be so obsessed with either a sense of
Looking
worthlessness,
around.
yeah,
Yes. Mhm.
worthlessness as we compare, or a sense of like, superiority. And once you've achieved that, like maybe you are greater than in some way,
Mhm.
and maybe, you've had success at work, or you've parented really well, or you've acquired a lot of wealth, whatever it is, if you've achieved some status, you do not want to lose that status. Like it
Mhm.
can just absorb your whole life. Your whole life and mindset can be directed toward maintaining what you've achieved. And
Mhm.
so, in the same way, whether it's worthlessness or superiority, our enemy wants to get our eyes just completely focused on ourselves and forgetting about the bigger picture that God has for us. I mean, this
Yes.
life is so short. It's
Right.
so short.
Right.
It goes by
Yeah.
so quickly, and we have so much that we have to do. We
Yeah.
cannot get bogged down
Right.
with
Right.
all of this nasty mess
Yes.
of
Yes.
comparison.
Yes. So the whole one of the big things in the book all the way through is this measuring cup that's on the front right here. And so you talk a lot about the difference between the lines and the spout. Would you unpack
Mhm.
that just a little bit for us and share that illustration and how you use it in the book?
Yeah, I would love to. So I've my trusty measuring cup right
Yes.
here. And so this is how we use the metaphor. Picture your life like a measuring cup, and inside the cup are all of the things that make you you, so your gifts and your aptitudes and your resources and your personality, maybe your family, your heritage, whatever it is that makes you you. And then what your enemy wants you to do is take your cup and put it next to somebody else's and measure
Mhm.
yourself against them, in all the different categories, and feel either superior or inferior to them based on what's in your cup and what's in her cup. And like we just said, that can be completely distracting. It can absorb your whole life. You can spend your whole life trying to get more money in your measuring cup and prove you have more, or maintaining whatever beauty that you've been blessed with, or whatever it is. You can
Yes.
spend your whole life on maintaining the lines. But what our Jesus invites us to is he wants our focus on the spout.
Yeah.
And he says, you weren't designed to live trying to measure up. You were designed, whatever has been put in your cup, it's meant for the world.
Right.
You're designed to share your life. And so he invites us to tip our measuring cup. And the beautiful thing about this is when we tip our cup and we get to the business of pouring our lives out, suddenly the lines, they're meaningless, they're irrelevant.
Yeah.
And so you can't be both pouring and
Mhm.
measuring. If you're measuring, it's this. If you're pouring, it's this. And you don't do both at the same time.
And it makes me think also of I was just teaching on Psalm 46, and one of the things we were talking about is that like living, bubbling spring that's inside us when we
Mm.
go to Him for our needs, right? And so I think there's this fear that when we pour it out, we won't have it anymore. I would just wonder your thoughts about this. But I think as a believer, no, I know this, as a believer, we are promised this internal bubbling so that no matter
Mhm.
what, because what's in that cup came from Him anyway, which we
Yes.
sometimes lose focus of, I think, lose track of. It came from Him anyway. And when we pour it out, when we put it back down, it's still full when we're connected with Him,
Totally.
right? I mean,
Yes.
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
lose
And
it. We're just like, oh, we're losing it, And the reality
mhm.
is, oh no, honey, no,
Mhm.
it'll
Right.
still be full as long as
Right.
we stay in connection with Him. That's the our part of that
Totally.
job, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, like just take wealth, take
Yes.
money. We're so afraid of giving it away, and we can become so absorbed with maintaining the status that our wealth gains for us,
Yes.
and so we're afraid to tip the cup and pour it out. And yet, what happens when we do? Like
Yes.
we have this new freedom, and then we get to experience God providing. Like even when we give sacrificially in a way that doesn't make sense to the world,
Yes.
like my husband was just furloughed with COVID-19.
Mhm.
And so we had to, we weren't in dire straits by any
Mhm.
stretch, but we had to reevaluate, are we going to continue to give
Mhm.
during this
Mhm.
time? We don't know how long this hardship will last. We don't
Right.
know. And, we're committed to giving to different ministries and organizations. And are we going to give? And maybe, we didn't give with the same level
Mm.
of extravagance as before, but we chose to continue to give.
Right.
We chose to, like, even with fear of the future and not knowing what, I mean, my husband's 53. That's a really hard time to
Yes.
be relaunching your
Yes.
career, and we just didn't know what God would do. And so, but we kept tipping that cup, and oh my goodness, the Lord has provided.
Mhm.
He just started a new job yesterday,
Oh,
and
yay.
this
Good. Mhm.
this job is like, well, no, I guess Tuesday. And this job is like, it's even better than the one he loves it. I mean, not that there are different ways that both jobs offer different opportunities, but this is a much more like complex, like,
Mhm.
opportunity. He loves to get his hands dirty and work on a complex project. So that's why I say it's better.
Yeah.
But the Lord has provided
Yeah.
again, like
Mhm.
in a situation where there is vast unemployment, God has provided. And I just want to talk though to the woman who's like, yeah, not for me, thank you. We're
Mhm.
furloughed and there's no job on the horizon. Um, you can trust the Lord. You can
Yeah.
trust Him. And I'm not somebody who would say, to be foolishly extravagant with, pouring out more than you have or going into debt. Don't ignore the other principles, but certainly don't ignore the principle where God says to bring our tithes and offerings and see if he won't open heaven
Yes.
and bless us with more than we ever imagined. And that goes for not just wealth, but every area of our lives, like tipping our lives and pouring ourselves out with this extravagance, like not saving it up for tomorrow because we don't even know that there will
You
be a
don't know about
tomorrow.
tomorrow, right. Mhm.
Right.
And I think the same is true, you're talking, like, with some material wealth, but I think the same is true sometimes in our emotional weakness or our emotional maybe some kinds of exhaustion or something where we feel like we're depleted, we have
Mhm.
an opportunity to serve,
We
and we
do.
think, right, like, "Oh, I need to, like, save my energy for myself," or, "I'm already hurting, I don't need to,"
Yeah.
but there have been some really sweet times in my experience where the Lord offered a place for me to serve even in my brokenness,
Yeah.
right? That He has because we need him so much differently, maybe so much
Yes.
more, he shows up in
Mm,
a way that you're like, "Well, that wasn't what I expected to happen there," right? Just this enormous blessing for
totally.
me a couple of times. So, yeah, it can be
Yeah,
true in that too. Yeah,
and
yeah.
when we come to him with brokenness and neediness,
Mhm.
it's like we make more room for his power.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
if there's less in my if I feel like, "Oh, I just don't have enough to give right now,"
Mhm.
and yet I pour,
Yeah,
I just make more room for the power of the
right.
Spirit to make up for my weakness. He in my
Yes.
weakness, he is strong. And Angie, I know you serve women like I do. I am confident that there are times that you walk into a ministry setting where you're thinking, I got nothing to give. I am
Yeah.
so depleted emotionally. Something's going on in my heart or my life.
Mhm.
And those are the moments that I have gotten to experience this communion with
Yeah.
Jesus like
Mhm.
none other. I remember going to a retreat some years back, and some things, my life was just imploding personally.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I'm walking in. I remember the coordinator had said, it's Friday night, like, excuse me, we'd really like you to be funny. Like be humor, like really what we want. We want
Oh,
humor.
sure.
And I'm thinking, I got nothing funny in me. There is no humor. Like, God, how am I going to do this? I don't have anything. And I remember I had some friends praying. They knew what I was going through. And I remember getting back to my room that evening and texting my friends and saying, "Oh my goodness, you would not believe what God did for me." Like
Mm.
he like it was amazing how
Mhm.
he made up for my lack.
Mhm.
In the
Mhm.
lowest point of my probably I would count that as one of the lowest points in my entire life.
Mhm.
He showed up and made up for my lack. And then if I could just, continue the story, there's a comparison component of this story too. Um, so after I sent that text at like 10 p.m., the next or no, so I'm alone in this room, at this retreat center, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and I remember like just groaning and thinking like, "Oh, you looked awful on that platform. You're so fat and you weren't funny. You tried to be funny. You weren't funny." Like all of these accusing messages. And
Mhm.
I remember reaching for my phone to see what time it was. And I noticed the text that I had sent to my girlfriend, like exclaiming like,
What God had
"Wow, God
already
is so good."
done.
And I thought, well, what happened between, 11 p.m. and the middle of the night? Like what happened? What
Mhm.
happened was my enemy had crept in into that darkness and was
Yeah.
accusing me from that bedside, tempting me to just feel like I was less than, that I was lacking, and to focus again on the lines rather than focus on all the ways that God had filled me and I was able to pour. And so I just said, you know what? This is not happening here. Like
Yeah.
I'm gonna, and what I did was I just started singing a worship song to
Mhm.
Jesus there
Mhm.
in the
Yes.
darkness.
Yes.
And by the time the first little part of the song was done, the darkness had fled from my
Yes.
heart. The
Mhm.
enemy, resist the devil and he will flee. And
Yes.
I was able to recognize like, okay, this is the spiritual battle. This is
Right.
what's going on here. And I am going to resist. I'm not going to fall prey to this living by the lines. I'm going to focus on, you know what, God, I'm going to keep pouring.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep trusting you will fill me up.
Yes.
And that's exactly what he did. It was an amazing faith building experience.
So interesting how we can focus on the faithfulness and then suddenly we focus on like, okay, so thank you so much, Lord, for helping me be funny and giving them what they need or whatever. And then with a little time, what creeps in sometimes is, well, you might have been okay funny, but you weren't as funny as dot, 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 right?
Right. Right.
That one conference that people laughed so hard, whatever. And
Right.
I do that too. And my husband is very good. Sometimes I will share with him, like, I'm not feeling as good about this message or whatever that I've put together as I do. And he just is so quick to say, remember how often that's what you've said. And you've walked away knowing those were some of the sweetest times you've ever been
Mhm.
able to be used by him, kind of thing. And just
So
really, he's very
true.
encouraging to point me back to his faithfulness, because
Yeah.
sometimes I get so caught up in my own, what are they going to think of me? And that's
Yeah.
just part of this comparison, right? That we're
It
talking
is.
about. Because
It totally
one of the
is.
things that I wrote down to ask you about, because I am not I think part of the thing is I did not think of myself as a comparison girl. Probably a lot of us don't at first. I would
Mhm.
think that's probably true. And there's a couple of Lisas watching that have both said how much they love the measuring cup illustration, just so
Oh,
you know,
good.
they really resonate with that. But I'm not somebody that needs to win. I'm not a very competitive person. I'm not like that. And so I guess I was kind of like, that's what a comparison girl is. I've got to get the trophy,
Mhm.
or I've got to get first place or whatever. But what I realized is that I do kind of have this little internal mantra a little bit that says, if you're not the best, you fail. But
Mm.
it's like the best compare. Well, I need to be better than her, or like what you're saying with the funny. I don't need to be funny. I need to be the funniest they've ever. I'm not
Mhm.
really funny, so that's not really what I go for.
Yeah,
But I
right.
don't like, whatever it is, like I don't need to be well received. I need people to leave this saying that's the best I've ever heard. And the thing is, for me, what I've realized, which is one of the things of growth I've celebrated, is you don't even know what they think. What
Right,
you think they
right.
think is this thing that you're making up in your mind, and you're comparing yourself. And I think the enemy is so good about this, at least in my life.
Mm.
You're comparing yourself to the story you're making up about what they think about you versus other people. Can you
It's
talk
so
to us
true.
just a little bit about, like, the danger of kind of like even just our thought process, not even our outward need to compete, but just our internal?
Yeah. Well, so you and I probably rub shoulders with a lot of authors and speakers. So let's take that as an example.
Yeah.
Like, let's say, you've been asked to speak somewhere, but it's only a group of 25 people, whereas
Mm-hmm.
your friend is being asked to speak for an audience of 200.
Right.
And so here's the thing that I always say to speakers in those situations. They're comparing, they're feeling jealous, and they're feeling like, oh, I don't want to speak if I'm not going to be the one invited to that platform. I'm just going to quit. I just forget it. If I'm only going to get to serve a group of 25, then forget it. Well,
Mm-hmm.
somebody needs to serve the group of 25. You know what I mean? And the one who's serving on the platform of 200, well, she's probably not going to be invited to the platform with 5,000.
Mm-hmm.
And there are different levels of platform, and we need servants on
Mm-hmm.
every single one of them.
Yes.
We need a servant in the small group leading the small group of women. We need that servant who's able and gifted to serve a group of 5,000. Like, we need
Yes.
all the different types of people, and God made us differently.
Yes.
There, some people are more gifted. They
Yes.
literally are more gifted. And can I live in a universe where
Yes.
she is more equipped, where it doesn't, like, it
Mhm.
wouldn't give her a heart attack to step on that platform in front
Right.
of 5,000 people? Like, it wouldn't even phase her.
Mhm.
Whereas me, I might lose sleep for a couple weeks,
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
oh, I have to,
Mhm.
and every new opportunity God gives me, I have to deal with the anxiety and the hurdle of getting past it. And then I'm like, I just am there to pour myself out. It's just little me again, and he fills me up. But I think there's a danger in saying, like, okay, I'm not gonna serve unless I'm recognized in this particular way.
Yeah.
And unless I can be the best at it, unless I get that, number one, whatever, um, category placed next to my name, then I'm not going to do this. Well, that's
Mhm.
not the way that we're taught in the
Right.
Bible.
Yeah.
Like, our goal is not, like, that's just getting back to that whole measure up mindset. And so I would just encourage our listeners, wherever the Lord has placed you, go ahead and serve him. Whatever amount of wealth he's given you,
Yeah.
whatever kind of family situation he's given you, whatever sort of, like, family background that he's given you, whatever it is, whatever you're measuring, whatever you're tempted to focus on the lines, instead focus on what he has given you and pour
Mhm.
that out. And I mean, we all know women that God hasn't given them as much, and
Mhm.
yet he uses them in these amazing,
Yeah.
powerful ways, right? And so I think just being content to serve him in whatever way he has equipped me,
Mhm.
and living in the same universe with, he equips us differently, and I can live with that. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things for me, the big takeaways for me was and to recognize it in yourself
Mm.
and confess it and move on almost, right?
Yeah.
I think that because I don't know, I think we can have freedom from it, what you said when we first started, but that doesn't mean that we're never gonna experience it because
Exactly.
I don't know, yeah, tell me if you think differently, but in the world that we live in, I think sometimes our first go-to is to look at a post or to look at something, right, and immediately we size ourselves up or down,
Oh,
uh,
right back in the
compared to that.
trap.
But if
Mhm.
we can develop a quickness, I always say the closer the connection, the quicker the correction. If we can
Yes.
develop a quick, if we can hear that quick correction, then we can say, I don't wanna live like that. I wanna go back to focusing on what you've given me and how you're
Mhm.
using me. And yes, go ahead.
And maybe even approaching, if it's social media, social media is a
Mhm.
huge pitfall for me.
Our face, yeah,
And
mhm.
so I actually created, if you go to comparisongirl.com and sign up,
Okay.
there's a little freebie thing you can sign up for. And I have some screensavers for like before you enter the comparison zone of social media.
Interesting. Yeah.
And just some reminders that, you know what, if there's some, one of the reminders is if there's some message going on in my head telling me that I'm inadequate and I'm worthless, just reminding myself that that's not from my Jesus.
Right.
That message is not from him. I'm going to
Yeah,
reject any of those sorts of thoughts, and also I'm going to reject the thoughts of superiority. Like if
right.
there's some thought going on in my mind, as I enter social media of like, oh look at she only got that many likes or whatever it is that we're measuring, or look at that obviously she's gained some weight, something like
Mhm.
that those are not the messages from our Jesus,
Yeah,
and we need to reject those. And
yeah,
so like I feel like going into those situations where we're most tempted to compare with our battle plan, knowing we're stepping into a war zone and we have an enemy who'd like to bring us right back down to the pit,
yes,
and we have a
yes,
Jesus who's saying like, you know what, when you get in there, if you will focus on pouring yourself out, if you'll
yes,
look around for a way to pour out something you've been given, to serve someone, to lift someone else up, to encourage them, you will be free of this measure up mindset. And Angie, you said earlier, like, if we're going to keep repeating this, it's going to be an ongoing thing. Well, as long as we live in this measure up world where everywhere we turn, the message is you have to get ahead. You have to measure up. You can't let them get ahead of you. Like to the extent that we're living in that world,
mhm,
yeah, I think we're always going to have
yeah,
to do battle with our
right.
enemy.
Mhm.
But the more we choose, every step that we choose in the right direction of living by the spout and not the lines, it's like, I always say, if you're walking in one direction and,
Mm,
and taking one step after another, well, it takes a lot more work to turn around and go the other direction, right?
yeah,
And so, but the freedom is if you turn around and fall back into that trap of comparing and whatever way you tend to compare, and you say, like, no, I'm not going there. And all it takes is one step to go in the right
right,
direction. And so
yes,
it's a step by step,
mhm.
little by little, training our hearts and our minds to choose freedom.
Yes, and to recognize it when it shows up in a different way, like, that's what I was saying about this book, I think, like, to be able to say, "I have claimed a lot of freedom about this in comparing my ministry or my service or whatever to others, but I have some work to do in comparing my choices or my sin or whatever, with someone else's," and to be able like, that's the next step of being more like him and to be able to celebrate that he's inviting us into that work too. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah, I was thinking too about, when you talked about repeatedly, like, and if I'm not gonna be number 1, if I'm not gonna be the best. I love it that Jesus never says, "Stop comparing."
mm.
That I think is sometimes our intuitive response. Well, if comparison is
Don't
the
do it.
problem, I'm just gonna stop. Well,
Yeah,
okay, but how
right.
exactly?
Mhm.
And I love that Jesus doesn't say stop comparing. And in fact, he tells all of these comparison stories. It's
Yeah.
really interesting, right?
Mhm.
He tells these stories, and you can just picture the disciples or the listeners kind of listening and thinking, okay, who am I in the story? And
Mhm.
he kind of puts different people next to each other. And one of those stories is the parable of the talents.
Yes.
So if
Yeah.
Jesus was giving us the response, we'll just stop comparing. I think he would have told that story like, he would have said there was a man leaving on a journey and he entrusted his property to 3 servants and he gave them each 3 talents, you know, it would
Mhm.
be all the same. But
Mhm.
instead, Jesus tells the story, so
Yeah.
one gets 5, one gets 2, and one
Right.
gets 1.
Yep.
And the beautiful part about that story is at the end, when the master returns, the one who got 5 comes and brings 10. The one
Mhm.
who got 4 or the one who got 2 returns with 4. You know, they've
Mhm.
each doubled their talents. And
Right.
the one who buried it comes back with, you know, only 1, and he's the bad guy in the story. But the other 2, they both receive the same beautiful response from
Yeah.
the master.
Right.
They say, he says, "Well done, good and
Yeah.
faithful servant."
Right.
And so really it's not, if I'm in that first place category, that's not, there is no requirement
Right.
for hearing well done, good and faithful servant based on how much I have, but just how
Right.
faithful I am. Every
Yes.
single one of us has
Yes.
equal opportunity to hear, well
Yes. Well
done,
done.
good and
Yeah.
faithful servant. And if
Yeah.
that is the goal, there is nothing hindering us from that. The only thing that would hinder us is burying our talent.
Yes.
You know, saying, forget it, I'm not going to play if I can't be the 5 talent
Yeah.
guy. I'm not, no, that, because, you know, I would feel ashamed of myself if I'm the 1 talent guy.
Yeah.
No,
Right.
even if you are the one, go
Yes.
ahead and double what you've been given.
Yes.
I mean, maybe you have a smaller capacity. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, some of our listeners might have a special needs child that
Right.
just absorbs a lot of their
A lot.
attention,
Right. Mhm.
or
Yep.
they might have a difficult marriage, or they might
Mm.
be fighting cancer, or
Right.
whatever it is, where they just have less capacity.
Right.
Our Lord knows that. He's
Yeah.
not asking you,
Right.
if you've been given 1 talent, he's not requiring of you 10.
Right.
He knows.
Yeah.
He knows what faithfulness looks
Right.
like, and every
I
one of us have
I
have that.
appreciate that so much. One of the things that really changed my heart, what I was saying, like, about my ministry is something that actually Joanna Weaver said in a Flourish thing that I was, watching, and she said, you know, she said that she learned that her job was to deepen the message and his was to broaden the ministry, and I
Mhm.
thought there was such a freedom in that for me that it, like, really shifted in my heart, and it made me think of it when you were talking about that. My job is to understand what you're calling me to do and do it, and your job is to do with that whatever you are gonna do. And I don't need to concern myself. And when I'm so concerned about the result, then I actually miss the blessing of serving you. And I'm like, and I really did not want to miss that. And so it really, that has helped me so much just in that particular area of my life. Yeah.
Right,
Making that
and
shift.
for me, like, like, there's a positive way to compare,
Mhm.
in that if I can compare it with a me-free
Yeah.
attitude and look around and say, "Okay, yes, I have been gifted with this, you know, writing thing, okay?
Mhm.
But I have not been gifted in the same way as this other author who can produce a book a year.
Right.
I'm not that author."
Yeah.
Like, I
Mhm.
love it that Joanna is inviting us to go deep and let God broaden,
Yeah.
you know, the
Right.
ministry, because
Yes.
for me to go deep and to produce a book that's actually worth, you know, spending 6 weeks studying in
Right.
God's word with my sisters. I mean, that it took me 3 years
Yeah.
from
Mhm.
the date that my last book was released. So, I mean, I'm not an every year
Right.
kind of author,
Right.
but can I live with that? Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I'm
Right.
just gonna be faithful with what
Mhm.
he's given, and trust that, okay, that's the kind of person that he's created me to be, this
Yes.
whatever capacity I have, I'm gonna work within those boundaries, understand who I am,
Yes.
lean in to comparison in that way and say, okay, I'm not someone who can handle, you
Yes.
know, this whatever more demanding,
Right.
higher demands. But there are some who can handle those
Yes.
higher demands, and Jesus knows who they are, right?
Right.
And so, yeah,
Yes.
being comfortable with what I've been given and what my assignments are, and they match, right? They match.
Yes, yes, absolutely, and they change, I
Mhm.
think, over time
They
too,
do.
as we deepen the message, he works in us
Yeah.
differently, and so that's something I just, you know, I don't wanna miss that. I don't wanna miss what he's doing in me and how he's bringing healing and wholeness in my life,
Mhm.
just so that I can, I don't know, whatever, try to get enough, and the reality is when you're chasing enough, I think there's never enough, and I like,
No.
you know, so I just want to thank you for this work. And I would say wholeheartedly, it is absolutely worth, thank you for your 3 years. It's absolutely
Aw.
worth 6 weeks of
Mm.
spending with girlfriends or whatever. And Shannon, this has been just a really encouraging discussion for me today, and I know for others. And take just a second and tell us where we can follow you, buy books, all that kind of stuff, or find where you're speaking, all that kind of good stuff. I guess probably not nowhere right now yet, but
Okay.
maybe someday. But tell us
I'm
all, where can we find Shannon and learn more about you? Yes.
Sure, yeah, I see you've got my
Yes.
site there at the bottom
Yeah.
of your screen, shannonpopkin.com. If it's easier to remember, you can go to comparisongirl.com too,
Okay.
and that will give you plenty of links to find the book. The book's available wherever. Now, I will say that the companion journal, so we've got the
Yes.
book is sort of a hybrid. It's a Bible study, but it's not one that you like write in.
Mhm.
And I offer like commentary, but you have questions at the end of each of the lessons. But then we also have a journal this time, a companion journal. It's a little bit bigger, and this is only available on my site, comparisongirl.com,
Okay.
and on Amazon.
Okay.
So I think it will get to the bookstores and the other sites eventually, maybe, but it's not there quite yet.
And what's that like
So,
inside? Can you show us? Just like,
yeah.
is it just plain, or does it have like specific questions that you write
Yeah,
inside? It goes along
definitely.
with the book with
It's got a lot. There's
suggestions.
these
Yeah,
like beautiful quote graphics, and there
nice.
are journal prompts. It's
Okay,
called Living by the Spout, and
sure. Okay.
little stories. The book is filled with stories. I interviewed a whole
Yes.
bunch of women, and so some of those stories are in the companion journal, inviting you.
Okay.
And then there are just different, like there's a video teaching series too. So there's an
Awesome.
opportunity to interact with that in the journal too. So you
Awesome.
can find all those details at the site.
Well, it is a treasure. I mean that. I really do. It's really, I'm going to be thinking about it for a long time. Some of the stories were really impactful, but also just, I really felt like the Lord, I don't think I've said this already, the Lord kind of opened my heart to this idea of when you are trying to receive your affirmation from mankind, you are actually rejecting the affirmation that I've already like bestowed upon
Mm,
you. And like, you
yeah.
have to make a choice, Angie, every day. Do you work to try to gain this unseen approval that really actually I don't know, even if you had it, I don't know that you'd know it, right? Like I don't even know that you
Right.
I don't even know that you would understand that you have it. I mean, it's
Mm,
possible that people like you and you don't even know, or whatever, or they think
totally.
whatever, so you just don't know these things. So you're chasing
Mm,
something you can't have,
right.
for something, and trying to, at the detriment of receiving from
Right.
me, from the Lord, what you
Totally.
already have in abundance. And so I just
Mm,
really, I've felt that kind of check in my heart through studying this with you, and I just really appreciate it. So,
beautiful.
yeah, thank you so
Beautiful.
much. We just really appreciate your time
Yeah,
today, Shannon, and we've loved learning from you today. So, thank you for being
that's
with
great.
us. So,
Yeah, I'd love to keep interacting,
yeah,
especially on Instagram. I'll be doing a whole bunch of different, posts and stories and stuff on this topic. So if it interests you, come, let's have a conversation over
yeah.
there.
And where are you on Instagram? Is it what? How do we?
Shannon Popkin.
Okay,
Yeah.
good,
Yeah. Yeah.
good. All right, all
Okay.
right. Well,
Thank
thank
you,
you.
Nancy.
Yes,
It
have
was
a
so
wonderful
good.
rest of your day. It's been good talking with you.
You
Bye,
too.
everybody.
Bye
Peace.
bye.